ode to my ancestors. I am a daughter of the diaspora. I carry the resiliency and the legacy of my people. I stand here today because they fought tirelessly for a chance to be equal. I am of Indo-Trinidadian and Tamil Sri Lankan descent, and today I stand here in Cambridge as part of the mere percent. But I am more than just a statistic. No, I am a dream made realistic. My ancestors were shipped across the Indian Ocean into the Caribbean Sea, brought as indentured laborers to work the plantations post-slavery. They spent years laboring blood and sweat, resulting in a lifetime tied to this debt. My grandfather worked countless years to buy back the land that he nurtured with his very hands. I am number 23 of 24 grandchildren, and here I stand. I am living proof that we can and we will. I am the legacy of ancestors that had dreams that I will now fulfill. My motherlands have been colonized and my people have been traumatized. In the midst of a war, my Tamil community had no choice but to flee as refugees. My people displaced, struggling to navigate an identity that was actively being erased. I come from a bloodline of strength and resistance, one that has allowed me to take pride in my existence. I am here, a daughter of indentured laborers, immigrants, and refugees. Their sacrifices paved a path so that I could discover what I was meant to be. I am a first-generation student, and every day I recognize that I am part of a movement. I am here to stay, and I will not walk away, because I recognize the power of attending an institution that was never designed for me. I recognize what it would mean to walk across that stage and hold that degree. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, and I stand here today filled with esteem. I am proud and I am loud. I am everything they could have been and more. I am part of a generation that will open the door of opportunities for my community as I carry their legacy in unity. Looking down from above, my ancestors say, "Beti, Mahal, you did good. You showed them that we could. For years, our potential was made out to be lost, but it had just been untapped. The world was afraid to see what we could be once we had an impact." I stand here today and I thank my ancestors, because without their fight, this dream would not be in sight. Through the obstacles and the barriers, I've stayed standing, and as I navigate these unfamiliar spaces, I will continue demanding, because my existence will always be my greatest resistance. Attending a school like Oxford or Cambridge means gaining access to some of the most prestigious networks in the world. We are told that the opportunities that come with attending an institution like this are endless, that we have entered into an exclusive space that every student dreams of. But does attending the school automatically mean access to these networks? Is the Cambridge experience the same for all? They often say the experience is what you make of it. But what if you never got the invitation? What if you never read the guidebook? And I'm not just talking about Oxbridge, but higher education in general. When you think about who can access and navigate these academic and exclusive spaces, you have to consider the kind of preparation and understanding that is required of students. There are countless stories of marginalized students facing the challenges of dining hall etiquettes and century-old traditions, things that you would never think would matter so much when trying to fit in and find your place. And let's not even start with the additional financial burden to participate in some of these opportunities. Oxford isn't just about surviving the rigorous academic life, but it's also about thriving in the social circle. If you're not a legacy child, someone whose parents or grandparents attended Cambridge, or the generational knowledge of navigating these spaces and systems has never been passed down, then where does that leave you? What does it mean for our marginalized communities when our networks, our leadership, our institutions, our social structures, and our knowledge banks are all predominantly white upper class? We cannot talk about untangling networks without acknowledging just how inaccessible they can be. This opens the door for us to ask, who were they initially created for? I want to take you on a trip down history lane, and I want you to listen carefully to these numbers. The University of Cambridge was founded in 1209, which is 811 years ago. That's over 8 centuries of Cambridge legacy. The first Black graduate, Alexander Crummell, a son of freed slaves, attended Cambridge in 1849. Now that's just 172 years ago. Now take in that the school was founded in 1209, and it took until 1849, 640 years later, for the first Black student to be documented in Cambridge. For context, slavery was abolished in Britain in the 1830s. And I do also want to note that there are conversations around Francis Williams, the first recorded Black writer in the British Empire, having studied at Cambridge prior to Alexander. But he was apparently funded as an educational experiment. An experiment. Now, does that sound like access to you? And if you thought those numbers were appalling, let me tell you about the first Black woman to have graduated from Cambridge, Gloria Carpenter. She attended Cambridge in 1945. That was just 76 years ago. My grandmother is older than that. Not even a century ago were Black women and women of color excluded from the profound networks of Cambridge. Colonization and imperialism enforced rules where those that were not white were unable to participate in academic society, let alone social society. Slavery and indentureship were used to keep racialized bodies subjected to labor and contributed to the maintenance of a hierarchical, racist class system. This notion of racialized communities as illiterate, subhuman, and backwards allowed for the justification that they did not deserve access to the spaces of the white upper class. So what does a 640-year gap do to a people? The years of lost intergenerational wealth and knowledge, the possible solutions and cures and inventions that we could have had. The intergenerational trauma and pain that we continue to embody and manifest in our livelihoods. If our own grandparents couldn't access this space just 77 years ago, then what does that say for the barriers that we continue to face? Just because we are now allowed to be here today, and the myth of equal access and opportunity may exist, we cannot deny that our communities have not had a 640-year head start. We are starting from scratch while undoing years of oppression. I am a first-generation low-income student. Coming to this school has been one of the most challenging experiences I've ever endured. My journey started in 2018 when I was in the final year of my undergrad in Canada. I had applied to Oxford, received my early acceptance, overwhelmed with joy and pride for this incredible achievement. This moment was one to remember not just for me, but for my community and my family. I grew up in a gang-affiliated neighborhood, rooted in economic challenges and systematic discrimination. For someone that attended an at-risk school where at the age of 7, we had police visits to tell us not to wear certain colors on the streets, the idea of Oxford seemed so far out of reach. But with the dedicated support of my mentors and my family, I made it. But only to be faced with the reality that access to higher education went beyond the acceptance letter. Just months before I was ready to attend Oxford, I had to withdraw my acceptance because I could not get the funding together. I hadn't gotten any scholarships, and I was willing to take out the loans, but I couldn't even get approved from the bank because I came from a single-income household and didn't have a strong enough cosigner. After working years to get to this point, having to turn down Oxford because of my financial status was heartbreaking. I remember feeling like I had failed myself and everyone around me. But determined to write my own future, I took a year to work, save, reapply, and secure funding. And in 2020, I was accepted to both Oxford and Cambridge with partial funding, and now here I am. But I want to note that getting here was only half the journey. Surviving and thriving in this institution is a challenge in itself. The imposter syndrome I felt when I first got here was through the roof. I was terrified that I didn't have the vocabulary to engage in a white upper-class institution. Students of color often find themselves code-switching to fit in, dropping their accents and slang, trying their best to sound white, which has historically been linked to sounding educated or professional. When you exist in a space that was never designed for you, you are forced to lose parts of who you are and make adjustments to better fit in. But the funny thing about being a person of color in a white space is that you tend to fall between the lines of both hypervisibility and invisibility. You always stand out, but you're often left out. Every day is a process of learning to be comfortable in your own skin and owning your identity, reminding yourself that you deserve to be here, that despite what history has said, you are worthy and capable, that your existence is your resistance. Now, I know we can't change the past and go back in history, but we can make sure that the next generation gets it just a little bit better than we did. And to do that, I want to refer to the famous British voice you'll hear when traveling on the underground, which in Canada we call the subway. Even if you haven't been in the UK for long, you know this voice every time you step inside a cart. Mind the gap. So I'm asking you to mind the 640-year gap. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge your privilege and the colonial underpinnings that come with it. I call on our institutions and our educators to actively work towards building networks and spaces that are accessible and inclusive of students that have consistently been left behind. Bridge the gap. We cannot erase history or wipe the 640-year gap from our memory, but we can learn to understand its impacts and the barriers it brings with it by aiming to bridge the gap through opportunities and resources catered to marginalized students. I'm not talking about just increasing the number of students and meeting quotas, but providing actual enriching spaces for marginalized students to develop and grow, like with Oxford and Cambridge's foundation year, where disadvantaged students are provided a bridging year to support the transition from secondary to post-secondary. We need to increase access to culturally relevant resources and support systems as students navigate this space through a specific lens and social identity. We need to show up for our students who have shown up time and time again, despite the circumstances they have been subjected to. This is not a conversation of the past, but it is an ongoing dialogue that will transform our futures. So please, mind the gap and bridge that gap. We've already lost the potential of 640 years, and we cannot continue to watch our students slip through the cracks. They deserved better then, and they deserve better now. Thank you.